we're back for another Gab with Abigail. If you aren't back and this is your first time on my channel, hi, welcome to Gabs with Abigail, where we talk about the Bates and Duggars and other D-list fundies. For today's video, we are talking about one of the Bates in-laws, the Romeikes, and their ongoing immigration situation. Immigration is a topic that is near and dear to my heart as the child of two immigrants. So let's gab. The Romeikes are a conservative German evangelical family of 9. Lydia Romeike, the eldest daughter of the Romeike family, is married to Trace Bates, the 8th of the 19 Bates children. The Romeikes rose to U.S. evangelical prominence when in 2008 they made the choice to leave their native Germany in order to freely homeschool their children. Homeschooling in Germany is completely illegal. Apparently even in the rare cases that they allow it due to illness, or if you're in the military and move around a lot, the government still sends people into the home to teach. The parents can't just do it, which, hold on to that because I think we're going to return to it. It has been illegal to homeschool in Germany since 1918, but it was not really enforced until the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, which this fact has become a huge focal point for the Romeikes' legal team. Again, we'll dive into that a little bit later. Anyway, the illegality of homeschooling having been on the law it would have been very well known to them that they were doing something that was very illegal. Nonetheless, after the summer of 2006, Uwe and Hannelore decided to pull their children out of school and homeschool. At that time, they only had 2 kids in school, Daniel, who was 9, and Lydia, who was 8. And a third child, Josh, was set to start school that year. The reason they have cited over and over again for making the decision to homeschool is that they didn't like what was being taught in the schools, the public schools, and didn't like the influence they felt the school was having on their children. This is from the U.S. courts in 2010. The reasons they decided to homeschool their children was the fear that there were negative influences in school. They felt that school engendered a negative attitude toward family and parents and would tend to turn children against Christian values as the Romeikes saw it. Specifically, the Romeikes objected to the teaching of evolution, the endorsement of abortion and homosexuality, the implied disrespect for parents and family values, teaching of witchcraft and the occult, ridiculing Christian values, and sex education. Although the court is still not exactly sure what the witchcraft and occult studies are in German public schools, the other aspects are fairly typical criticisms of public schools in the United States as well. In the recent interview he did on Trace and Lydia's channel, Mr. Romeike elaborated further regarding what was meant by negative influences and negative attitudes towards the parents.
Just to clarify for everyone, why did you choose to homeschool your children over having them in the public school? Because you did have them there for a little bit.
Yes, Daniel, our oldest son, and Lydia, who you all know, they both were in public school for 2 and 3 years. During those years, they actually changed, their whole personality changed. That even the neighbors would come to our house and ask, what's going on with Daniel? He used to be such a happy, open child and would come to us and talk to us, and now he always seems to be sad and withdrawn and doesn't really speak or talk much anymore. What's going on? So then we had Lydia, and she, after being in the public school for a while, she started having regular headaches and stomach aches, and we went to doctors to find out what's going on, and they wouldn't find any physical reason. So it must have been just, according to what they said, a psychological or reason, or being fearful of something. So we then found out from her that her classmates were kind of a violent type, and during recess time, throwing rocks and sticks, and it was just an environment for her where she did not feel loved or comfortable. She was afraid of going to school. Daniel had all the bullying going on, so we saw already something is wrong with public schools.
And to me, it's like if you were willing to uproot the family to America, why weren't you willing to uproot within Germany to find a school that better suits your children? Especially when it became clear the German government was going to be dead serious about this, that they needed to be in school. Probably not as spiritually rewarding for one's persecution complex, but still an option. If you are a curious person like me, you're probably wondering just a bit more than the Tennessee judge what witchcraft and occults they're teaching in Germany. If you watched Shiny Happy People or read Growing Up Duggar or any other pre-2015 Duggar book, you know fundies are aggressively against witchcraft, magic references, in content, whatever. So I tried to look into what witchcraft and occult they're teaching in Germany, and baby, it's basically them teaching or like performing Brothers Grimm. This is from a 2000 article talking about German homeschooling. In January, a court in Westphalia sentenced a mother to 6 days in jail, followed by 6 days for the father because they would not pay a fine for refusing to let their children attend a Christmas play based on the 1812 Grimm's fairy tale King Thrushbeard, which they consider to be blasphemous. And now I can only assume that because it's because Jesus is the reason for the season, that's why they considered it like blasphemous, because in my opinion, the story of King Thrushbeard sounds exactly like some fundies would want young girls to internalize. But in general, 2006 seems to be the year German fundies decided to really lean into this homeschooling is a fundamental part of their religion thing.
You do believe this is your religious freedom to homeschool?
Yes, not just religious freedom. I think it's a parental right. I think, of course, I believe God gave us children,
Right.
but we as parents are responsible of their upbringing, the way they are raised, and we as parents love our children. So a parent should have the right to do what they see as best for their children, whether
Agreed.
it is homeschooling them or putting them in a private school or whatever. This is a right that you as parents should have, and not a right that's given to the government. We as parents are responsible, even before God, we are responsible for their upbringing. God trusted us with children, and we want to raise them before God in the right way.
Well said. Well said.
So again, for all these reasons, after the summer of 2006, they pulled their kids out of school. They enrolled them in some sort of quasi-private school, and I say quasi because it was not a school recognized by German authorities, so it's like it didn't count. They get a bunch of warnings during the fall of 2006 for them to bring their kids to school. They didn't bring them to school. One day, the police show up to their house and take the kids to school. I'm telling you, in every video and interview, they make it like, and everybody talks about this, they make it seem like the police came and forcibly took custody of the kids and like the kids went to foster care or something.
Yeah, and we had maybe 1 or 2 days of freedom of homeschooling, and then all the problems started.
Came and took your children out of the home. You do.
Babe, the police took them to school. To school. Probably the school that they had been attending for the last 2 to 3 years, which, yes, if they were being bullied, might have been hard on the kids, but that's not what they're making it seem like. That's not why there was the trauma there. Not only this, but also Mrs. Romeike picked the kids up from school by lunchtime. The Romeikes also reiterate over and over that the police were armed. And to me, like, I'm an American. If a police officer comes anywhere, they're armed with a visible gun. So, like, I think even when CPS comes to take your kids away, they bring a police officer. But, they're still very Blue Lives Matter. Anyway, apparently the Romeikes didn't realize the police, technically didn't have the right to take them to school like that or something. And so the next time the police try and come, there are more people, from the neighborhood who help to stop them, because I think a lot of, the homeschooling Christian families were living in a neighborhood close to each other. And all of this basically is new to the police. So rather than making a scene when this happens, the officials leave and decide to switch tactics because the kids continue to be illegally homeschooled. So they start fining the Romeike parents for not having their children in school. fines. The Romeikes are getting all these fines and going before judges and probably like also in the midst of this racking up legal fees. I don't know, Germany. The judge keeps saying like, I hear ya, but those kids need to be in the school because that's the law, point blank. With the mounting fees, and I really don't get why they talk so much about the fines, because based on them reportedly making 12,000 euros a month, a $7,000 fine doesn't really seem that crazy. Like, just in the grand scheme of like what it is that you're trying to achieve from a moral perspective, of course I can get that. But, you know, it's just, at last report, it was about like $9,000 that they had in fines. And like, we'll talk a little bit more about the Romeike finances. And I understand the very real threat of jail and having your children taken away. Like, those are scary things. Like, I totally get that. It wasn't an unfounded fear. In 2007, Germany authorities took custody of Melissa Buskros, a 15-year-old girl from a homeschooling family in Bavaria. Authorities placed the girl in a psychiatric center and then in foster care. When she turned 16 and legally could decide where to live, the girl returned to her family. She later said police told her that she had been brainwashed by her parents, by her evangelical parents. And I want to know a follow-up from this girl today. I think the Christian subset of in Germany is an interesting thing. In 2006, the Romeikes were amongst the 7 fundy families in their area that were boycotting the homeschooling law. One of these families sued the German government and brought the case before the European Union Court of Human Rights. The court denied the appeal, and with no end in sight for the fines, the writing was starting to appear on the wall. With all this mounting pressure, the Romeike parents decided they needed to get out of Germany. But where to? Now let's zoom out for a second and look at evangelical Christianity in the late 90s, early 2000s. Fundamentalism was running through people's churches like the Tomb Raider. This idea of biblical manhood and biblical womanhood and God's design for women was becoming the zeitgeist of the era. I mean, Vision Forum and the Botkin sisters were still producing content that people were buying. The girlies were training up a child because they were created to be helpmeets. Being a truly godly woman meant being quiverful, being at home, and homeschooling. Whether they admit this or not, this movement was a huge factor in the Romeike family wanting to homeschool their children. This separatist movement that wanted a literal interpretation of in the world but not of it stands in direct contradiction with the German government's belief that part of having an education is being around other children. The German courts further said even if children were adequately educated at home, the state would not meet its obligation to educate if children had no contact with other children. Germany's High Court ruled that education includes not only the acquisition of knowledge, but also the education of responsible citizens who participate in a democratic and pluralistic society. The acquisition of social competence in dealing with other persons who have different views of the majority can only be trained by regular contact with society. It said the state also had an interest in the integration of minorities in order to avoid the emergence of parallel societies based on separate philosophical convictions. The court further said the exercise and practice of tolerance is an important goal of primary schools. The German government was and is trying to prevent exactly what the fundy world seeks to create, which are autonomous standalone families over modernist ideas of the individual. These families don't want to be beholden to the state. They'd rather follow older notions of kin and clan and the strict definition for members within the group justified by an attitude of us, our family, against the world. Mr. Romeike's description of his children's school experience exemplifies this mindset. The idea that children have their own autonomous right to an education stands in direct contradiction to what Christian fundamentalism espouses. Children belong entirely to their parents. They are gifts from God and therefore possessions. And I think this is all a good example of why people feel parents' rights is just like another dog whistle. In tandem with the homeschooling movement sweeping through fundamentalism was the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, or HSLDA. Founded by Michael Ferris in 1983 to defend Christian families who wanted to homeschool. At the time, homeschooling was not common, and most states, like Germany, had compulsory laws regarding school attendance. Through the efforts of HSLDA, homeschooling would become a widely available option throughout the U.S. States have varying degrees of oversight, with the overwhelming majority having very few regulations, something that HSLDA has actively pushed for and lobbied for. When in 1994, a law was going to be passed requiring homeschooling parents to at least have a teaching certificate, HSLDA was able to successfully prevent this. HSLDA is an extremely powerful and influential evangelical lobbying group. And when the Romeikes and the other 5 or 6 families decided to start challenging the homeschool law, HSLDA was directly involved. When ultimately the Romeike parents decided they would leave Germany, HSLDA reached out to them and asked them if they would consider coming to the U.S. and then applying for asylum. From the outset, the Romeikes' move was so that they could be a political pawn, a power play, and propaganda piece for evangelicalism. The modern pilgrims, as they were first touted in their first Focus on the Family feature, they were perfect Christian nationalist fodder, the perfect type of immigrant, white, Protestant, who looked just like the Puritans who founded this inherently Christian nation. I just want to make it extremely clear that the Romeike family came here fully understanding that they were going to play the poster children for a right-wing legal and political agenda. Coming from Germany, they, like every other sane person, did not think of themselves as asylum seekers.
Countries, it would have taken years to get even a visa, and we didn't have much time. We knew we had to leave right away. Then we got a phone call from HSLDA and asking how we were doing, and when I told our story, they asked us if we would be willing to come to the United States and applying for political asylum. So that was a new thought for us. We never thought as Germans we would ever have to apply for asylum in another country. But since they said they would help us with the whole process and guide us through everything, we accepted because we really had no other choice. We had to leave. And that's how it all got started.
Their case in the U.S. had no prior precedent, and HSLDA wanted to establish it. Immigration is extremely expensive and taxing process, and HSLDA offered to take all of this on for the family. They argued that the reason the Romeike family should be granted asylum was because their particular group as homeschoolers was being persecuted by the German government for wanting to homeschool. So the Romeikes sell all their possessions in August of 2008 and fly to the U.S. and settle in Morristown, Tennessee. They overstay their 90-day visas by applying for asylum, but legally you have a year to file asylum. And it not be, a bad thing. During the run-up to their court date to determine if asylum would be granted, HSLDA put the Romeikes family on a press tour, drumming up support within the homeschooling and evangelical community. Indeed, even before they had arrived in the U.S., HSLDA had been sharing the stories of the German families, asking people to write letters in protest to the German embassy. In 2010, asylum was granted in Tennessee. However, in 2013, the Obama administration, which was notoriously aggressive about immigration, but he was black and gave us DACA, so everybody, liberals and conservatives alike, just kind of ignore that, appealed the decision to grant asylum. And there are just certain things within the judge who approved the asylum statement that kind of make it clear why the appeal to overturn the decision won. So let's kind of dig into some of the things that were in that court decision and then what the Obama administration had to say about that. In the original asylum court case oral decision, these are some of the key points that were discussed regarding how the decision was made. So one being the fact that the homeschooling law in Germany only began to be enforced when the Nazi Party came into power. The emphasis being on the fact that the state at the time wanted to be able to indoctrinate the youth. But the court document, the oral decision, also points out that Germany is no longer a fascist state with a dictator. And as a democracy, if homeschooling mattered to a significant enough majority in Germany, as a democracy, technically that law should be able to be changed. The court decision for asylum also admits that plenty of other European countries allow homeschooling, but that they were not as interested in the Romeike case. Again, just a lot of this document I really feel like is setting up for a successful appeal without necessarily meaning to. The judge also brings up how the U.S. has less regulation on homeschooling and brought up a court case in which the Amish were allowed to, decide based off of their religion how their children's schooling would go. And in that case, the Supreme Court found that there was a fundamental right of a parent to establish a home and bring up the children and worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience. This is a central right in America. Justice Brandeis described it as part of the greater right, the right to be let alone, that the government does not own people, that people should control the government. So in the United States, obviously, the Romeikes would have no problem with their homeschooling. However, our Constitution is not in effect everywhere in the world. Maybe the world would be a better place if it were, but it is not, and we do not necessarily have any right to expect other countries to do exactly the way we do in everything. And it's exactly, Judge, right. This is America where freedom of religion is in our Constitution. If the Romeikes feel like they cannot practice their religion the way that they want, then they should try and immigrate to a country that will, but this is not an asylum case. It would be weird to suggest that the United States doesn't have any laws that restrict religious quote-unquote freedom. It might be a part of someone's religious beliefs for a grown-ass man to be able to marry a girl as soon as she gets her first period. Some girls get their periods as young as 9 years old. And the U.S. legal system would never allow a legal marriage to occur at that age. Is Warren Jeffs not sitting in a prison as we speak? Just like these laws protect children in the eyes of the German government, compulsory school attendance laws protect children. While the Romeikes might be perfectly nice, normal, and loving family, there will be other people who abuse the system. It happens all the time in the U.S. In conclusion, this is the opinion regarding asylum. The judge basically lists a bunch of things that to me, again, was setting up the Romeike asylum approval to be overturned. He opens by saying that, he kind of agrees with that the Romeikes' religion is kind of vague and not distinct enough to, for really that to be a specific reason the government is targeting them. But then he ultimately says that, well, actually, the homeschooling and child rearing aspect is not vague, even if their religion can't be pinpointed to a specific denomination. And he, continues on that, I didn't really see them as a special group. They don't really fit the qualifications, but now I see them as a special group, and I'm going to go ahead and approve the asylum. Just some of the things that were being stated, it's clear that they're going to poke and be able to poke holes, because within the document itself, it's almost like you're contradicting yourself as the judge. I do find that the religious beliefs of the Romeikes are being frustrated, and the practice of their religion will not be permitted under current German law dealing with homeschooling. And I also find that they belong to a particular social group of homeschoolers who, for some reason, the government chooses to treat as a rebel organization, a parallel society for reasons of its own. As stated above, this is not a traditional German doctrine. This is a Nazi doctrine. And it is, in this court's mind, utterly repellent to everything that we believe in as Americans. Religious freedom is in many ways the most basic freedom in this country. Certainly, most of the original refugees that came to the United States in colonial times and in the early days of the Republic were religious refugees, many of them from Germany, such as the Amish and the Mennonites, and many other groups. And therefore, I find that this is not just a question of enforcing our Constitution on a foreign country, but rather the rights that are being violated in this case are basic to humanity. They are basic human rights which no country has a right to violate, even a country that is in many ways a good country such as Germany. Okay, and so let's just go over then what was this. The information in this document is coming from at this point, the appeal had been approved and the Romeikes tried to petition to have that decision overturned. And this is the court's response to why no, they're not going to move forward with this petition, which goes over basically the original reasons that the appeal was successful by the government's end, and breaking down what the Romeikes are saying, just no. So the document goes on to say that the Romeike family had not proved actual persecution, but rather were saying they would be persecuted if they continued to try and homeschool in Germany. All they have received is fines. They have received the standard treatment for people who do not follow Germany's compulsory school attendance laws. They weren't being singled out, they are simply breaking the law, and the government is responding to that. The appeals court explained that while it is true that laws that apply to everyone can be selectively enforced, the Romeikes have not proven this to be the case. The parents of Melissa Busgros, for example, decided that it would be better for her to learn at home. Melissa's siblings continued to attend public school, but Melissa struggled due to high noise levels and canceled classes, prompting her parents to teach her at home. In response, the government removed Melissa from her parents' custody, not to persecute her parents, but to enforce the country's compulsory attendance law. Other parents, too, have tried to homeschool their children for secular reasons, whether because they were very unhappy in public school, highly gifted, or low performing, and they were also punished. The parents of school skippers, truant students, who do not show up for school face civil fines as well. If the parents fail to convince their children to go to school, the government places them in alternative learning programs or special schools for truants. This enforcement of the law is nothing to do with homeschooling, whether for faith-based or secular reasons. For better or worse, Germany punishes any and all parents who fail to comply with the school attendance law, no matter the reasons they provide. The Immigration Board also shared my opinion that just because the U.S. has a law that allows something that another country does not constitute as a reason for asylum. To a similar end, the Romeikes complained that Germany's compulsory attendance law violates their fundamental rights and various international standards, and thus constitutes persecution, regardless of whether it is selectively enforced. Each argument shares an Achilles heel. Asylum provides refuge to individuals persecuted on an account of a protected ground. The United States has not opened its doors to every victim of unfair treatment, even treatment that our laws do not allow. That the United States Constitution protects the rights of parents and guardians to the direct upbringing and education of children under their control does not mean that a contrary law in another country establishes persecution on religious or any other protected ground. And even if, as the Romeikes claim, several human rights treaties joined by Germany give parents the rights to make decisions about their children's education, for people who are so anti-illegal immigration, it is interesting that they don't see the precedent that they would be setting for undocumented people that they don't like, which is exactly what this quote is explaining. Kind of adding to this narrative, but this is my opinion. So the Romeikes and their legal team keep saying, regarding the homeschooling law, it only started to be enforced when the party came into power. And this is what the appeal document had to say about that. If, as the Romeikes claim, the law emerged from the Nazi era, that would understandably make anyone, including the Romeikes, skeptical of the policy underlying it. But such a history would not by itself doom the law. The claimants still must show that enforcement of the law amounts to persecution under the immigration laws. They have not done so. And what this makes me think of is that how much these kinds of people are, I hate critical race theory, the people that are in the Romeikes camp. And so this quote kind of points out that hypocrisy, because you're basically saying oh, so you agree that when a law is fundamentally formed as something, it can keep carrying those original intentions? Yes or no? Lastly, the Romeikes tried to argue that their basic human rights were being violated by not being able to homeschool, and that Germany was violating human rights treaties it had agreed to that included parental rights. This argument was also rejected. Just as a petitioner cannot obtain asylum merely by proving an American constitutional violation, a petitioner cannot obtain asylum merely by proving a treaty violation. As then Judge Alito explained, the concept of persecution does not encompass all treatment that our society regards as unfair, unjust, or even unlawful or unconstitutional. If persecution were defined that expansively, a significant percentage of the world's population would qualify for asylum in this country, and it seems most unlikely that Congress intended such a result. The asylum statute does not inflict on foreign governments the obligation to construct their own draft laws to conform to this nation's own highly complex equal protection jurisprudence. And I feel like this reiterates or co-signs my point when I read the initial oral decision approving the asylum, which is that we have our own laws restricting religious freedom, and we can't necessarily call it persecution if another country that allows religious freedom has different laws that regulate that. After the court said, hard no, pack up your shit and get out, the Romeikes once again went on the campaign trail to get the evangelical bloc's support, asking people once again to sign petitions, contact local state representatives, and of course to appeal to God.
Ago, hoping to find refuge because they wanted to homeschool their children in freedom. And a federal judge granted them asylum, but the Obama administration's Justice Department has been trying to deport them, saying that homeschooling is not a right. The case is before a federal appeals court.
Can you tell me why
began homeschooling in Germany because they didn't want their children exposed
why
to
are
things
you
like
in
witchcraft
America?
and graphic sex education
and the forcible
removal
of his children.
About 2 years.
The crime was that you wanted to
We wanted
homeschool
to
your
keep our
kids.
family together. By that time, we were fearing that they would take custody of our children, so we had to leave Germany and fled here to the United States.
It's an underground thing. Homeschooling in Germany, do people do it and they keep it quiet and it's...
The Justice Department stepped in.
Homeschooling is illegal in
Learned that
Germany.
the practice of parents educating their
Many
children
homeschooling
could
parents
not
are
be used as a
persecuted with
basis to
fines,
seek
jail, or the
citizenship.
loss of their
And
children.
attempted to
Fun fact, Alyssa Bates' husband's father, Daniel Webster, is a Florida state representative, and because of what was going on with the Romeike family, introduced legislation to make homeschooling a reason for asylum. We'll return to that tidbit. Ultimately, in 2014, after petitioning and doing a press tour as organized by HSLDA, ICE decided not to deport them, but to grant indefinite deferred status. Looking at the definition of indefinite, it's strange to me that they have been acting right now as though they were promised that they got to stay forever. Their deferred status was most likely granted due to DACA, something Republicans have fought aggressively to end. First, Trump tried to do it in 2017, and it was denied because the court said that they didn't do it the correct way. Then Texas and like 8 other red states sued to end DACA, saying that Obama had overstepped his powers when it was created. A federal judge decided that this was the case and stopped new applicants. Immigration is super confusing, so bear with me. And I say most likely that they're being protected by DACA because based on how they describe the process that they have been going through with ICE, and also I could not find any other instance within immigration when a deferred status is granted that I'm thinking it's DACA. And it's interesting that they never say DACA. Wonder why. But it's true that since Mom and Dad Romeike were also given deferred status, they were being granted something special because it's really just for children. Which brings us to 2023, where the Romeikes were informed that their deferred status has ended and they need to get German passports for their children and move back to Germany. The Romeikes say it was out of nowhere and they didn't understand why it happened. But again, they were granted an indefinite stay, not a permanent one. But respectfully, English is not their first language, and having also been drowned in white privilege, I get why it might have just been confusing for them. The Bates and HSLDA did the same tried and true tactics to appeal for their stay, and the family was ultimately granted another year of deferred status. 2 of the 7 children are married to U.S. citizens, and I'm sure people are wondering why then why they were at risk of being deported. And now they've explained that it's that like their immigration status is still tied up in the asylum case, and it's been hard for them to disentangle from that court case. Also, that the process is expensive, like almost like it's difficult to legally immigrate to the US. The Romeike family are classified as undocumented immigrants. When seeking asylum, while you are technically not here illegally, while you wait for a decision, you are undocumented. People who are DACA recipients are technically undocumented, which is kind of the point of what DACA is trying to resolve. But of course, the Romeikes are white. They're not viewed or discussed with this language. The disgusting way that people from the southern border are talked about is so, like, I don't even know what to say. The cognitive dissonance and the willful ignorance is astounding. I wish I was more jaded to be shocked by it, but like the Daily Mail, a notoriously conservative POS tabloid, printed these side-by-side pictures of the Romeikes at the kitchen table learning and people illegally crossing over the southern border. And the difference between the Romeikes and the people coming across the border is privilege and nothing else. The Romeikes come from a country with one of the strongest passports in the world. The German passport is actually stronger than the US passport, meaning it is so easy for them to buy a plane ticket and automatically get approved for a visa to visit another country. Not only that, but the Romeikes had the financial means to pack up the entire family and fly to the US. Not only this, but also the Romeikes aren't, and I mean this in the most respectful way possible, skilled professionals that would have made them lucrative immigrants. They were piano teachers. Privilege is them having their legal fees covered. Privilege is having a member of Congress introducing legislation to try and keep you in the country.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most treasured privileges of parents living in the United States is the freedom to choose the means to best educate their children. For many families, including my own, that choice is homeschooling. Unfortunately, for many parents living in countries where freedom of choice and expression is supposedly valued, homeschooling can entail punitive fines, jail time, and even seizure of their children. The Romeike family fled Germany after facing persecution for homeschooling their 6 children and were granted asylum here in the United States. Now the Romeikes face deportation unless they are granted a hearing before the full 6th Circuit Court of Appeals and receive a favorable decision. Mr. Speaker, no parent should be faced with imprisonment, fines, or removal of their children simply for choosing to educate their children at home. I call on the Obama administration to persuade Germany to respect international human rights laws that recognize the authority of parents to direct their children's education. I also call on the administration to grant asylum to the Romeikes so they can be afforded the privilege our country offers to educate their children freely in the manner they choose. I yield back.
Furthermore, part of the privilege of being a part of the European Union, they could have more easily moved to a European country to homeschool and still kept the unregulated US as their ultimate goalpost. Have you guys seen that special about the big families in England where one of the families was a homeschooling family? They could have tried to move there before Brexit. There's Denmark, Belgium, Finland, Italy, Kazakhstan, Luxembourg, Slovenia. Forgive me if I call bullshit on the sense of urgency that has now compelled the Romeikes to move their entire family all over, across the ocean, and then to continue to perpetuate that narrative. Because the thing is, I think the Romeikes have every right to want to live in the US, but they should have just applied the regular legal way, period. Would it have taken a few years and been expensive to finance on their own? Most likely, but that is the reality of immigrating to the United States, which is why so many people cut corners and try and get here. The bigotry and entitlement of the Romeike family to see themselves as better than those people is, in my opinion, why we don't need one more white family like that in the US. It's repugnant and it reeks. I also think the Christian persecution complex is a part of what allows them to see themselves as separate from the plight of people at the border. I think their behavior is a good example of why Germany wants children in school to be exposed to different types of people. Going to school with other undocumented children or first-generation children exposes them to this idea that, we're just alike. We have moms and dads that work hard and love us. It's so easy to demonize and otherize people you don't know. This is not to say that Germany is some perfect racially inclusive country or that students in the US public schools don't experience racism and discrimination. However, it is easier to combat these things when these biases are being challenged on a daily basis. I'm just so tired because these are the same people who will tell you that they're not racist or biased or prejudiced, which is what this is. These opinions are informed by their political ethos. Situations like these are exactly why I cannot stress enough that being nice and being a Christian does not mean a person can't be racist, prejudiced, or discriminatory. I want to stop calling people good or bad Christians, but rather this sort of behavior is a piss poor reflection of what Christianity is. It's no surprise that people are leaving the church in droves. Very briefly, I want to talk about one or two inconsistencies in the things that the Romeikes have espoused.
Right into another question. What would happen to the Romeike family and to y'all if you were forced back to Germany?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we don't know exactly what would happen, but we know what happened before we left. So all this would likely be coming back because our two youngest children who were born here in the United States, they still have 5 to 7 years of school left. So if we homeschooled them in Germany, we would face the same kind of persecution, and the government is really trying to financially crush families who are homeschooling and emotionally crush them and coerce them into following their rules, which we would, of course, not follow when we homeschool. So we would face fines, we would face the police coming again to take the children, we would face the loss of custody of our children, we would face losing business that we built up, and all of that would come back at us. And again, others are jailed for time. So all this would come back, and in addition to that especially for the older children who were brought up here and have their high school diplomas through homeschooling, that all would not be recognized by the German government and universities. They could not get any higher education. They would probably not even get a job, because if you don't have a recognized diploma in Germany, you don't even get a good job. So that would for them be hard, and also they don't know the German language as well anymore after 15 years.
This has been your home. This is where you go to church. This is where you have jobs. Carson Newman, piano teacher. This is the last 15 years. This has been it.
We have all our friends here. There's almost no family, from my side, no family in Germany. So we wouldn't even know. See, we would go into a plane with our suitcases and land on a German airport not knowing where to go.
Yeah.
Well, we wouldn't want that.
No, of course not. So
one thing being that their children don't speak German anymore and would be going somewhere they don't speak the language. Based on the slight accents of all the grown children that they have, they didn't speak English when they got here and they picked it up. The youngest two Romeike children are about the same age as when the eldest children first came to the US and learned English. So why wouldn't they be able to pick up German once going to Germany? I wouldn't be surprised if the kids understand German better than they can speak it. That's the situation for me, and I'm sure for a lot of first-gen kids. Well, at least for me, but that's the thing. Two, that their children wouldn't be able to get jobs if they had to move back to Germany because they don't have any German degrees or whatever. So they would have to start over millions of immigrants do every day. I think also that that's a personal choice if their kids didn't develop any transferable skills, knowing that they would not be pursuing college degrees. I don't, or wouldn't be able to, you know what I mean? I just feel like it's a thing. 3, money in general. Shout out to Reddit because it appears that the Romeike parents own 2 or 3 houses and make rental income. The housing market is insane right now. And if they sold their houses, plural, they would have that nest egg to take with them to go to Germany. IDK, I just feel like all of these things are supposed to tear at our heartstrings, and it's just it's actually kind of annoying. This is just a reminder of the amount of privilege that you guys have experienced and want to continue to experience, and that feel like we should be going out to bat for you when there isn't any grace or patience or understanding that you extend to others who are in a similar situation, that you see yourself as different when admittedly, you didn't see yourself as asylum seekers when you first were having this issue in Germany and were trying to leave. But this is the kind of call, like, it's so disgusting to watch them sit through these interviews, to let people use their pictures in publications, demonizing people at the southern border.
All right, now to what may be yet another disturbing aspect of the Democrats' immigration scheme. As the Democrats are flinging open the border to migrants from countries like Venezuela, could they be discriminating against others from Western Europe who actually have legitimate grounds for asylum? Well, consider this case of the German couple who left their homeland 15 years ago after being fined for homeschooling their children. Yeah, homeschooling is a crime there. Well, the Romeikes family says that police dragged their children out of their home and forced them into a school. So the parents were worried they were going to lose custody, and they fled to the United States seeking asylum. In 2014, after legal proceedings, they said they were given the okay by officials here to remain. But then earlier this month, they got a call from immigration officials basically telling them to pack their bags and get ready to leave. Uva and Hannah Loreko and Mike, I'm messing up. Romeikes, join me now. Great to see both of you. Uva, I understand that you have 2 weeks to return to the local immigration office, the ICE office. Then what?
Yeah, we are supposed to come back in 2 weeks from now to show our passports, renewed passports, to be ready to self-remove our family back to Germany.
Well, Hannah, are you watching this play out at the border of the United States, where 500,000 Venezuelans have already been given work permits without any examination of their claims for asylum, no investigation at all of their claims, yet they're being given temporary protective status? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is interesting. We try to do it the right way, and we don't get the right to stay here or to immigrate. And now for 15 years, we fight for that right. And it seems there are two faces to this administration.
Well, Uva, do you think you're being discriminated against here because of your cultural views, your religious outlook? Obviously, you decided to homeschool your children because of concerns about government-run schools. Do you think there's a double standard here, at the very least?
Well, of course, we don't know exactly the motivation they want to want us to leave the country right now. But if that were the case, if they want us to be deported because of homeschooling, then there would be discrimination, and that would be a bad thing. But America used to be a free country, and people from all over the world immigrated here to seek freedom, and we initially got freedom. We got asylum granted by a judge in Tennessee, and it was then the administration at that time, 12 years ago, that revoked it and turned it down. So we are sad that happened, but we hope and believe that there will be a change.
I mean, it seems like your case, at least from everything I understand about your case, and I read extensively about it, seems like it's the classic case of persecution for your religious views. I mean, that is what asylum was designed for people like you. And yet people like you are being told bye, essentially. There's something really rotten about this. Uva and Hannah, thank you so much.
Demonizing them. Like, it's terrible. It's terrible. Like, no compassion whatsoever. The amount of times that Trace was like, oh, they did everything right and blah, blah, this rhetoric that just because you did all the right steps to get here that you get to stay. I feel like that's the harsh reality of America and its immigration laws. That doesn't matter. It's their right to say no, right? I think it's wild to think that, okay, all of these people who are coming over the border are getting to stay. Why can't I? Well, you guys have stayed here for like 15 years is yes or no. And this lack of compassion, and why I really don't feel bad for them. And I hope that they ultimately have to go back to Germany because you're regular people. And I hate to say that because that feels petty and like bitter almost. Because, right, I do genuinely feel like if you want to immigrate to America, like you should have the opportunity to. Like I do. But I just almost think like it's a lesson in privilege. And unfortunately, I know that this is the kind of thing that would just make them more embittered to like a liberal government. It's even like, it's funny because the original document, the original like overturning of their appeal was presided over by a conservative appointed judge. It was a judge who was appointed by George W. Bush. And this federal judge was like, no, I think this is dumb. And the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear the court case. So what are we really talking about here? In general, it's a hard and difficult thing to see playing out. Like I said, as the child of immigrant parents, I also grew up with a lot of immigrant children or kids, first gen. Like I didn't even realize until like doing this video that I grew up, all of my closest friends have been first gen kids also. Until college is when I started to make close friends outside of that. But even in college, like my best friend to this day is also first gen like I am. And that's, it's so weird to have immigration be so demonized when all you like really see is that the majority want to work hard to achieve something and live the American dream, or else they become like any regular American that's born here. But like most immigrants are hardworking that I know, right? Like I think it's weird, this assumption that most of the people who come here illegally come here with like bad intent, like that they're not striving to do something or to make something of themselves. And like even just this idea of the fear of going back to Germany, it's Germany. Like imagine, I'm Haitian, somebody had to get deported right now. You've been living in America for 20 years. You're getting deported back to Haiti in the state that it is right now. Like those are two entirely different things. And I'm just tired of the nonsense. Like even just like what's going on right now in Palestine, right? In Palestine. The fact that those people's livelihood is being bombed the hell out of. And still, people like the Bates, like the Romeikes, lay their sympathies entirely with Israel. And like probably wouldn't support the idea of those people getting to come here the way like Ukrainians got to come here. Like as a grace thing. Like say too much there, but there would be such an outcry and uproar if we allowed like a special refugee status for Palestinians. And what does that say about us as a country? Like, what does that say about us as Christians in terms of compassion and right and like loving thy neighbor, you know? But that's it for me. I just had to talk about this. I had to get it off my chest because it bothered me so bad, like watching the comments, like Kelly Jo Bates, nastiest taste in my mouth for you, watching you just ignore those comments, letting them be said. But yeah, thanks you guys for joining me for this video, and I'll see you for the next one.
It's like you niggas gotta stop acting weird. You niggas gotta stop acting weird. You niggas gotta stop